Shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I want to start by giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai Bahasham, Rakah HaKodash, double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone who rule well and teach well, and peace and blessings to the hopeful elect, pushing this word with all truth, righteousness, and sincerity. Shalom, shalom. This is Brother Kwame Watt of the Great Millstone Charlotte Camp, coming with another quick lesson to the spirit and power of Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai. And, this morning, I just wanted to touch on, the privilege of suffering, man. Right? This is what we've been, blessed to receive. It is the belief in Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. But it's also a blessing as we'll get in this Philippians first chapter. It's a blessing to suffer, in the name of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. Right? Because now we understand that this suffering is only for a present time, this present time. And it's going to make us, better, and it's creating us, or it's purging us of these unwanted characteristics and qualities, so that we can be better servants to Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. Right now, this is Philippians 1:29. It reads, "For unto you is given the behalf, or in the behalf of Hamashiach, not only to believe on him, but also to suffer for his sake." Now, when you read this in the NLT, it reads, "For you have been given not only the privilege of trusting in Hamashiach, but also the privilege of suffering for him," right? So when you look at this word for privilege, so like here, it's in the free dictionary, privilege, it reads a special advantage, immunity, permission, right, or benefit granted to or enjoyed by an individual, class, or caste, right? So who's that? The elect, right? The elect, so like, have been given that special advantage. They've been given that, right, immunity from the judgment of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. They've been granted, and they're about to enjoy these rights, these rites of passage. Yeah, right? It says the principle of granting and maintaining a special right or immunity. Definition B: such an advantage, immunity, or right held as a prerogative of status or rank, right? Because it's going to be rank, right, amongst the Israelites, man. You know, and the elect, right? Those chosen spirits from the beginning, the 144,000. The 12, King David, Yahweh Shai, right? Those are all ranks, right? And these ranks are receiving that privilege. These ranks are going through these sufferings now, right? So that they can be established with those privileges in the kingdom, man, right? It says an exercise to the exclusion or detriment of others. Who's getting excluded? 2/3, right? Because as we go back, you know, they weren't given the privilege of trusting in Yahweh Shai, right? So they haven't been given the privilege of suffering for Yahweh Shai, you know? Verse 30 reads, "We are in this struggle together. You have seen my struggle in the past, and you know that I am still in the midst of it." So this is what we're going through right now with these struggles, you know, these different events, that are being used to purge us, right? To make us better servants, to make us better leaders, better teachers, right? Whatever the Lord needs from you, He's putting you through these tests in order to pull that out of you, right? And to get rid of what He doesn't want, right? Now we read this in 2nd Ezra chapter 7 and verse 18. It reads, "Nevertheless," because we read back in that definition, uh, these things are exercised to the exclusion or detriment of others, right? So the rest of the world doesn't have the privilege, right? So they're not going to have the access to that immunity, right? They're not going to have access to these advantages once Jacob's trouble, commences, man, right? It reads, 2nd Ezra chapter 7 and verse 18. "Nevertheless, the righteous shall suffer straight things and hope for the wise." But why? Because the righteous have been given that eye salve. They've been given that belief. They've been given that faith, right? These are all gifts, right? That are what? Privileges to have. That's why you can't make light of these things. That's why, elders and apostles always tell us to know what we're involved in, right? Because you have to understand, right? This is something that the Lord is giving you an opportunity to exercise, man. Right? It says, and hope for the wise, for they that have done wickedly have suffered the straight things, and yet shall not see the wide, man. Because these people are about to go through and are going through, right, the similar things that we're going through, man. Right? We're all facing different tests and trials and tribulations, right? But that's why, it's like when you read about Jacob's trouble, it says he will be saved out of it, man. Right? So we're going to be in the midst of all the chaos. We're going to be protected, but the Lord has to save us out, from these things, you know, and even going into, our day to day walks. We face some of the same trials and tribulations that these other people do. You know, the only difference is, like we read, we hope for the wide, right? We have a hope. We can see, right, the kingdom coming, man. We can see Yahweh Shah coming. We can see all these things, right? But the two-thirds can't. They weren't given that privilege. They weren't given that access. You know, I got a few here. Because we understand that, as this persecution is about to commence, upon the believers, you know, your faith is going to be tested. But that's why it says here, Psalm 37:1. It says, "Fret not thyself because of evildoers, neither be thou envious against the workers of iniquity," right? Because these people seem to be winning, right? They seem to be doing better off than we are, but it's just the illusion, right? It's all an illusion of success, right? It's an illusion of prosperity. That's why I said don't be envious of these people, man, because their judgment, right, is going to be terrible, right? That's why scriptures tell you, horrible is the end of the unrighteous generation. So we take this this suffering, in stride, right, with a smile, you know, because we know what we're suffering for, right? And that's why I said it's a privilege to suffer, right? Because as you suffer, there's a reward at the end of the suffering, man, right? It's not happening for no reason, right? For two-thirds, it may be, but for the elect, for those who believe on Yahweh Shai, we understand where where our rewards, Salakia, or where our reward is coming, man. You know, uh, Psalm 73:3. For I was envious at the foolish when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. Right. So that's the spirit we can't be in. Right. We're not jealous of these people, man. We know that this is all temporal. All these things are destined to, uh, be burnt up in that lake of fire. You know, Proverbs 24:1. Be not thou envious against evil men, neither desire to be with them. Right. Because regardless of what they have now, their end is terrible, man. Proverbs 24:19. Fret not thyself because of evil men, neither be envious at the wicked. So the point, being these people weren't given the privilege to suffer for Yahweh Shai, right? They're suffering because of their evil doings, right? But they're not suffering righteously, right? Now we're suffering, in the name of our power in the Son. You know, it reads, jumping down here, Ephesians 2:8 through 10. For by grace are ye saved through faith, right? And that not of yourselves, it is the gift of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, right? So all this is a gift, right? This wisdom, knowledge, and understanding is a gift. Faith is a gift. Belief is a gift, right? The grace is a gift, you know? So just like that, uh, to be suffering for Yahweh Shai's sake is a gift, right? Because everybody isn't allotted to suffer, you know, uh, for Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. Only the elect are, right? Which we pray that we're of that number. It says, not of works, lest any man should boast, for we are his workmanship, created in Hamashiach Yahweh Shai unto good works, which the Most High has before ordained that we should walk in them, right? And in that walk, right, that manner of life, right, that way, that we're carrying on in, um, it's going to be trials and tribulations, man. You know, the servant is not greater than his master or his Lord, right? So what he went through, we have to go through. You know, now we're going through it on a lighter scale, right, in a lesser level, but it's still, designed to purge us, man. Just like it was designed for him, right? We go through our own tests, our own trials, right, in order to be made perfect in the eyes of the Lord, man. And these things are only going to intensify, but it's a mindset that we have to maintain. Having that this is a privilege to be going through this, man. You know, um, we'll read this here. Actually, let me pull this up. So what? I think this was Salakia. It might be the top. This is Sirach 2 and 4, or Ecclesiasticus 2 and 4. Whatsoever is brought, well, let's start in 2 and 1. Sirach 2 and 1. My son, if thou come to serve the Lord, prepare thy soul for temptation, right? So this is a requirement, right? These temptations that, we overcome things in the flesh, right? We overcome different demons that brothers may have, right? This is what you have to prepare yourself for, you know? And that's what the body is, admonishing us to do, right? To make these preparations in the spirit, and it's all the spirit of Yahweh Shemel Shah preparing his elect, right? For what we're about to face, right? Even what we go through on a day to day, you know. It reads, "Set thy heart right, and constantly endure, and make not haste in time of trouble." Right. So constantly endure. You know, it's a consistent battle, right? That we have to go through, right? And we have, the Lord has given us the strength, um, right? Going back to that gift of faith, that gift of that belief, right? To overcome these things. It's like it. Cleave unto him, and depart not away, that thou mayest be increased in thy last end, or at thy last end, right? So this is what we're hoping for at the end of that suffering, right? That we be increased. You know, that's why we're not suffering for no reason, man. Going back to us having that hope, right? Hoping for the wise, hoping for right the kingdom, hoping for rulership, hoping for righteousness, right? This is where we have hopes in, right? This is where our belief is rooted in, through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shem Shai, right? Um, verse 4, whatsoever is brought upon thee, take cheerfully, and be patient when thou art changed to a low estate. For gold is tried in the fire, and acceptable men in the furnace of adversity, man. So this is the point, right? We want to be seen as acceptable men, right? We want to be remembered as acceptable men in the eyes of Yahweh Bashem Yahushua. And acceptable men are going to go through those tests, right? They're going to go through that fire, right? And come out gold. That's what we want. We want to go through that fire and come out gold, right? There's no going back to that Philippians, right? Pull it up here. Philippians 1 and 29. It says, "For you have been given not only the privilege in NLT of trusting in Hamashiach, but also the privilege of suffering for him." Man. So we've been given the privilege to suffer, and that privilege is tied to the fact that these acceptable men are going to be shown to be gold, right? Right? That pure gold, that you have to be purified, going through that fire, right? And so we take it cheerfully, right? As we, walk into this persecution, as we go through these different tests, because we know the Lord is setting it up, for our betterment, man, right? So we'll get here. We'll close with this. Hebrews 12:6, it reads, "For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every son whom he receiveth." Right? So as he's receiving us, you know, he's gonna put us to the test, man. He's gonna test your faith, test your will, right? Test your strength, right? And ultimately, he wants to see you lean upon him, man, right? You trust in the Lord, right? Let the Lord work, you know. But he's given us the resolve, the various characteristics, the strength, the faith, the belief, you know, to be able to pass these tests, man. Right? That's why you go through what you go through on your day to day, you know, because the Lord wants to see you, you know, overcome. Right? It says, "If ye endure chastening, the Most High dealeth with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not?" Right? So you want to be chastened, you want to be tested, right? I think it was King David, if I'm not mistaken, said, you know, prove my faith, you know, or prove me, right? He wants to be tested, right? Now, you know, it comes with balance because you don't want to be under constant, you know, stress and strife, right? But you know, you want the Lord to test you, man. You want the Lord, right, to be, you know, trying to make you better, right? Make you a better servant, right? A better leader, a better teacher, right? You know, it says, verse 8, "But if ye be without chastisement, whereof all are partakers, then are ye bastards and not sons," right? So that's why two-thirds seem to be winning out here, man. And like we read, you know, we're not to be envious of the wicked, right? Because ultimately that's a sign that they're not of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, right? "Furthermore, we have had fathers of our flesh which corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Shall we not much rather be in subjection unto the Father of spirits and live?" And even, you know, our leadership, right? As our leadership checks us, right, corrects us, you know, chastens us, right? It makes us hardened, right? You know, because we're being prepared in the spirit, right? That's the spirit of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, you know, chastising the body, you know, in order to, to prove us, man, as sons, right? So our spiritual fathers, right, starting with our apostles and elders on down, you know, they're testing us as well, right? It reads for the verse 10, "For they verily for a few days chasten us after their own pleasure, but he for our profit, that we might be partakers of his holiness," right? So the chastening of the Lord is for our profit at the end of the day, right? That going back, right? That suffering is for your profit, right? Nothing else. You know, two-thirds can't profit from this suffering because they don't have that relationship. They don't have that understanding. They weren't given that gift ultimately, right? To believe. You know, verse 11. "Now no chastening for the present seemed joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby." Right. Now let's get this in NLT. Slovakia. Uh, Back in Hebrews chapter 12, and we'll close with this. Hebrews 12 and 11 in the NLT. "No discipline is enjoyable while it's happening, but it's painful," right? You know, the suffering, right? To suffer. And going back to being patient, because patience goes into suffering, man, right? And then your patience possesses your souls, right? It reads, "But afterward there will be a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way." And we're being trained, you know. The Lord is putting us through this training, right, for the fight to come, you know, to overcome, to have that victory, to take part in that victory, right? You can't win without proper training, you know. So this is what the Lord is setting us up for, right? Is to have that, you know, that fruit of righteousness, man. To have that going back to the where we at? Ephesians 2:10, where his workmanship created in Hamashiach Yahweh Shai unto good works which the Most High hath before ordained that we should walk in them, man. So he's preparing us for these good works, right? Even going back to that Second Esdras, right? Now this is us being tried in that fire of that furnace of adversity, right? To be purified, man. You know? But that's the point. Just going back to the title of the lesson, the privilege of suffering. This is a rite of passage that we go through, right, on a day in, day out basis. But it's all set up for our betterment, man. It's all set up, to put us in a position to overcome, right, the things of this world. The Lord giving us the strength, giving us all the gifts through the Spirit, right, that's required for us to ultimately win. You know, so I just want to close by giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Shem Shai. Hopefully that was an edifying lesson to the Spirit, of Yahweh Shem Shai. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone who will and teach well, and peace and blessings to the hopeful elect, pushing His word without truth, righteousness, and sincerity. Shalom, shalom, and Kwame Sharela, and Abad Babal, man. Shalom.